A Los Angeles teacher claims she's in love with a former student who she allegedly had a relationship with for more than a year. What's worse, the student was only 13 years old when all of this is said to have started. She's now accused of staking out the boy's high school, luring him into her car with drugs and raping him there. On other occasions, she allegedly raped him in her own classroom. Prosecutors now say she left her husband for the boy, claiming she's willing to go to jail for this teenager, even calling the student her version of crystal meth. It's a shocking case with a lot happening all around, so we'll hear from criminal defense attorney and former sex crimes prosecutor Kathleen Bogenschutz to try to make sense of it all. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law and Crime News. This type of case is unfortunately one we cover pretty regularly here on Law and Crime. A teacher abusing their position of authority and allegedly sexually assaulting one of their students. But this case may be even more intense than the others. Here's the defendant, 43-year-old Colleen Jo Matarico. She's being held in jail right now on a pretty sizable bond, but before her arrest, she was a special ed teacher at John Burroughs Middle School in Los Angeles. Also of note, Matarico is married and the mother of 2 children. Prosecutors say she got wind of the investigation into her illegal conduct last year, and instead of backing down, she became more severe. That's when she apparently went to the victim's high school, gave him some marijuana, and then forced him to have sex with her inside of his car. That incident happened just this year, but investigators say the relationship started long before. Most of their sexual encounters were allegedly between August and November of 2023. Investigators believe Matarico started by grooming this student, eventually convincing him to have sex with her in her classroom. According to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, Matarico took advantage of a position of trust and confidence as a teacher to commit these offenses. The boy was just 13 when all this started, but some of these alleged incidents happened after he turned 14 too. The school was tipped off to this alleged abuse in October 2023, and that's when the Los Angeles Police Department's Juvenile Division began the investigation. The middle school released a statement reading, quote, "Once cleared by the Los Angeles Police Department to notify the school community, a notification was sent to families about these allegations. District protocols are being followed, and we remain in cooperation with local authorities. Due to the ongoing investigation by law enforcement, we are unable to disclose additional details about this matter. Please be assured that the safety of our students continues to be our utmost priority. Students and the greater school community are always encouraged to share any and all concerns with their school or with local authorities. We remain committed to supporting Burroughs MS, meaning middle school, and the greater school community with counseling and support services. We understand that some students may be impacted by this incident. Students can always reach out to teachers, counselors, or school staff for support." Hey, if you're out and about running errands while you're listening to this video, listen up. I have to tell you about this brand new app, Upside, that gets you free cash back on daily essentials. I use it every time I pump my gas because it's so easy and it's free. Here's what you do. Download the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. Pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Matarico was ultimately charged with 5 felony counts of lewd act upon a child under age 14. 2 more felony counts of lewd act upon a child age 14 and 15, and 1 felony count of furnishing a controlled substance to a minor. She pleaded not guilty to these charges and appeared in court just this week. That's when prosecutors revealed even more shocking details about Matarico's alleged conduct. After her arrest, prosecutors say Matarico didn't have any remorse. Instead, she said she was willing to go to jail for this boy and even left her husband because she was so obsessed with the student. This is the part where prosecutors compared the boy to a drug, saying he's Matarico's form of crystal meth. Prosecutors argued that if she was released on bond, the boy would then be in danger. They pointed to Instagram DMs when Matarico had apparently reached out to the boy's friend in hopes of getting in contact with him. A public defender is the one representing Matarico and pointed to her clean criminal record at this hearing, suggesting she should be released. A judge ultimately set Matarico's bond to $590,000, saying that if Matarico puts up the bond, she'll still be subjected to GPS monitoring. Meanwhile, the case is still under investigation as LAPD officials believe there could be even more victims. If that's true, Matarico could face even more charges. Okay, one thing's for sure about this case, the allegations are pretty disturbing. So to try to make sense of that, we've got to turn to criminal defense attorney Kathleen Bogenschutz. Kathleen, thank you for coming on with us today.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So something that stood out to me right away about this case actually was mentioned by the LA County District Attorney that this teacher abused her position of power. She took advantage of a student. She's supposed to be an authority that they can trust. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's even some states, including my state of Florida, that have created these new statutes that have criminalized simply being in that position of authority. So even if a student was 18 and a teacher, turn 18 sometime your senior year and starts having some kind of a relationship with the teacher, anywhere outside of the school, that would be technically legal, although depending on the age difference, we might all frown on it. There would be nothing to prosecute. But that has been criminalized in and of itself. But here we've got a giant age gap. We've got a middle schooler. We've got a position of authority. And I even read that in one place that she continued the relationship even after she knew there was an investigation going on.
Yeah, that's actually accurate. What investigators have said that she kind of got wind of this investigation and she doubled down. She still continued to talk to this student and actually went to his high school and allegedly had sex with him outside in a car. She said she's in love with this student. She says she'll leave her husband for him. She's obsessed. I don't know. What do you make of all that?
No, I mean, at some point she mentioned that this was her crystal meth in the messages. And one of the things that I'm not a scientist, but I sometimes I play one on TV or in a courtroom because we do expert witnesses. And one thing that some of my experts have pointed out in the past is that the same dopamine receptors that things like cocaine and meth and stuff like that light up in the brain also light up when you're in love. And for some people, like if you're eating a food that you terribly enjoy, they do light up the same receptors. And for me, I mean, she's 43 years old. She's a mother. She's got kids that are the same age as this victim, or at least fairly close to it. One of the things that I would be considering if I was representing her is the whole works, head to toes, for medical as well as psych evals, because to just suddenly begin taking these kinds of risks at age 43, you don't go out and start committing crimes at 43. That's not what you see when you're a prosecutor. And I was a prosecutor for 12 years. You see crimes beginning like late teens, early 20s. And for somebody to just take a turn like this at 43 leads me to believe that there is something else going on in her life, or that stuff has happened in the past that maybe has either not been reported or caught.
So let's talk about the starting of this crime because as you said, she's 3 years old at this time, and the student was 13. I just am always wondering, how does something like this even get started? I mean, you go to school, there's your teacher, that's the relationship that you have, but then apparently she started grooming this student. So how does it jump from student teacher to now she says she's allegedly in love with him?
Yeah, and grooming is the word that we use. So 8 of the 12 years that I was a prosecutor, I did sex crimes, not did them, but prosecuted them, obviously. But it starts by almost moving the goalposts. That's the way I always used to describe it to a jury. Well, I can cross the line, or I can kind of tiptoe closer to the line, maybe confide in this student more than I would confide in a normal student, speak to that student like they're an adult, meet them after class, do things that are a little bit outside the normal teacher stuff. And as the student doesn't act uncomfortable, as the student seems to be enjoying it, as the student really enjoys, being a teacher's pet or a special friend of the teacher, you kind of move the goalposts a little bit further. So whether it is intentional, whether somebody is a true predator and is thinking their way through, moving the goalposts, or whether it's just something that happens, I don't know. But that is generally the trajectory that you will take in these cases. It's you move it, like, see how much further you can go, and nobody reports it. And then you take another step across the line, and then you take another step across the line. And unfortunately, when we're talking about a middle schooler and a middle school teacher, you have fairly unfettered access to the child during school hours. So, I mean, I'm not trying to freak out all the parents out there, but it does make sense to me, and I'm a parent as well, as to how this could occur.
Yeah, you're right. They do have crazy access to the students because they're seeing them all the time. And actually, this school was the scene of at least one of these alleged instances. Apparently, she had sex with a student in her classroom and then a different time in her vehicle, but outside of a high school. To me, that's pretty brazen, to say the least.
Right. And think about like a middle school schedule more so than an elementary school schedule. Middle school and high school, you've got free periods as students. You're not moving around with the same class of kids. Everybody's got different schedules. It's easier to do that if you were somebody that was inclined to do that. And the really insidious nature of that is doing things in the classroom. You can go back to people like Deborah LaFave, who's another one of our famous Floridian teachers. She was diagnosed, I mean, she was younger than this teacher, I think at the time. She was in her 20s, but she was, I think, post-crime diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that was something that, while does not excuse the crime, it does make a lot of sense because there's this risk-taking behavior that's associated with mania. And that's what I said. If I was representing her, first thing, you're going in for a psych eval. I mean, it's possible that you have a predator here. It's also possible that there's a lot of mental health that's teased in here, especially if she's saying, I'll leave my husband for you and blow up her entire life for this 13-year-old. It's shades of Mary Kay Letourneau as well, who had 4 children and a husband and left all of them.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up Mary Kay Letourneau because there are significant parallels in the two cases. The fact that she allegedly fell in love with this student and then she went on to marry that student and have children with him. She says in this case, the 13-year-old, now 14-year-old student, she would leave her husband for. She's willing to go to jail for him, which is something Mary Kay Letourneau did, served her time, and then got with this student afterward and married him. I mean, do you think that's possible in this case?
As a former prosecutor on these cases, if she's willing to go to jail for him, that can be arranged. It sounds like they've got quite a bit of evidence here. There's text messages, evidence that you wouldn't have from like back in the 90s with Mary Kay Letourneau. They were actually caught in the act. But here you've got these like text messages between them. You've got transcripts of conversations. And I'm assuming that, she's home with her kids and texting him at the same time. And that's, a secondary thrill that you can have when you're not with him. These messages are just going to be absolutely devastating for her. Frankly, I think that the state should probably, their main goal should probably be to keep her in custody until he's at least 18.
I'm wondering about those text messages because to me, it's just crazy that she would text this information out because she knows that people can go back on your phones, look through your call log, look through your social media. Who were you talking to? So it's almost black and white right there for prosecutors to say, hey, on this date at this time, here's what you said. You guys met up. I mean, is that invaluable for their case?
Absolutely. Especially because, look, I haven't met this kid, and hopefully his identity is kept private. But a lot of times when you've got these like preteens and teenagers in relationships with older people, they're convinced that they're in love and they've got very strong feelings of infatuation for this person. And sometimes they're not particularly cooperative, particularly at the beginning. As they start getting older, I've found in my, having prosecuted literally hundreds of these cases in the past, as time passes and the student or the victim gets a little bit older and then they're 17 and they're looking at 13-year-olds and they're going, oh God, that was me. And I've seen some really fast 180s on that after a couple years have passed with victims. But a lot of times, like, if they're not being particularly cooperative, having their messages back and forth with at least there's something that you can put into evidence that indicates what occurred if they're refusing to testify.
Talking about testimony, it's interesting you brought that up because she did plead not guilty to these crimes. So if she does go to trial eventually, it's possible that prosecutors would reach out to the student and say, hey, will you go on the stand? What would all of that look like in the way of getting the information they need from him without re-victimizing him?
That's always the balancing test for a prosecutor. My state has Marcy's Law. It went into effect in early 2019. It means that you need to take the victim's wishes into consideration. But if the victim is under 18 and is still a child, there's kind of a balancing act that has to occur there, because the kid might be saying, I don't want to testify. I'm in love. I want to marry her and run off with her into the sunset on a white horse. And the parents want her dead. I'm assuming it's almost like a mediation type of a process where you separate the child from the parents in the state's office, and you try to talk through exactly, and then you go to your supervisors and you round table it with other prosecutors, trying to decide, can you put this kid on the stand? What's going to happen if you do that? You maybe like role play with the kid in your office. You try to develop as much of a rapport as humanly possible as a prosecutor, trying to see what's going to happen here. I don't know what the exact contents of these messages are. If the defendant is stating, yes, I did go have sex with him, and then someone caught them in a room together with the lights off, and maybe you can sometimes cobble together the evidence that you need for a conviction without putting the victim on the stand.
And now we know we have this one victim, but prosecutors are saying there could be more. She could face additional charges because investigators say, hey, if you experienced this, talk to your children, come forward. Do you think that's possible in this case? I know you mentioned it earlier. She has a clean criminal record before all of this. Is it possible that she just didn't get caught before?
She didn't get caught. It wasn't reported. Something was reported, and it was, this is like boys telling stories out of school about their hot teacher or something like that, which, middle school boys are middle school boys. And it's something that maybe was not investigated to the extent it should have been. My question as a defense attorney, because it does seem like they've got some fairly good evidence that something did occur here and it was very wrong, is this a pattern, or what happened in her life at age 43 that, after being a teacher for, I'm assuming, about 20 years, that made her just drive the car off the cliff? And why this kid? And in a lot of cases, like, for example, with Mary Kay Letourneau, I actually read all the books about her because I was a sex crimes prosecutor and I was very interested in all of this. It turned out that she had a younger brother that drowned in a pool, and her family blamed her for the brother's death. Her father had had some kind of a sex scandal as a politician and was a very conservative right wing. So there were all kinds of little micro traumas in her. I don't think that the death of her brother is a micro trauma, but there was all these kind of things that were swirling around her, as far as and then you add in the mental health aspect of it, because she ended up being diagnosed, I think, as bipolar as well, prior to being sentenced to prison. So while it doesn't excuse it, maybe it explains why somebody might wake up in their late 30s, their early 40s, and suddenly do something that is just so out of character.
That will be interesting to see what the defense comes up with. And that kind of leads into my next question, because you pointed out that her team will likely look through her medical history, mental health history, but how will they still defend it? I mean, even if she had some sort of mental health issues that she was going through, she had to know that it was wrong ethically, but also illegal to have sex with a kid who's 13 or 14.
Right. I mean, it's such a high standard. I'm not talking about an insanity defense. An insanity defense is you are so out of it that you don't even know what you're doing is wrong. I mean, she is a middle school teacher in a middle school classroom with a 13-year-old. I think it would be very difficult to make that argument from a defense perspective. What I'm talking about is mitigation and maybe some kind of an explanation for the behavior. I'm not saying that somebody can't just wake up one day and decide to go off the rails, but usually there's something that you can point to. When we're talking about relationships with children that are underage, most states have what's called a strict liability way of proving the case But strict liability means that so long as it occurs and the state proves that you did it, it doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter about mistake. If it happened, you're guilty. So, and I could give you the example in the past of one of my colleagues had a case where an 18-year-old boy, or young man, I guess, was at a teen club. So it was up to like age 19 or pre-21-year-olds, and apparently had a relationship with an 11-year-old afterward and was informed that he had had sex with an 11-year-old, and he threw up immediately. And it's very difficult to feign that. But the problem is that, like, strict liability, you just committed a capital sexual battery in the state of Florida. So we all had to kind of roundtable, what's the appropriate punishment here? Does this person need to register as a sex offender if this girl is lying to him about her age? But it basically takes away, strict liability takes away the defense of, well, she said she was 18. It puts the onus on you as the adult to figure out how old this person is before you have any kind of physical relationship with them. And that was kind of the legislative intent, as I understand it, behind making these crimes strict liability offenses.
I think the bottom line in this case is there are some pretty concerning allegations here. But Kathleen, thank you for helping us understand a bit more about the case and the charges.
Happy to be here. Sorry under these circumstances, but it's going to be an interesting case to watch.
The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office released a statement about this case. It says in part, quote, "The accusations against Ms. Matarico are deeply disturbing and violate the trust that was placed in her by the students, their families, and the entire community. I, meaning the district attorney, want to acknowledge the courage of the young victim and his decision to report the abuse. Our office and investigators are also working to identify any potential additional victims. The office will seek justice for the victim and those affected by Matarico's actions." If Matarico is found guilty of the charges, she could face more than 20 years in prison. Up next, she's due back in court on November 26th. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.